This is the Golden Gate. It's the east gate. It's known as the Mercy Gate to Jerusalem. As you can tell, it's been sealed up for a long, long time.
According to Jewish tradition, the Messiah will enter Jerusalem through this gate.
When he returns, they also fear that he's going to come back up onto the Temple Mount, which is behind this wall. That's
2,500 years ago, a prophet named Ezekiel wrote something strange. He described a gate, an eastern gate, and he said it would be sealed shut, not by enemies, not by war, by God himself. The prophecy said no human would ever open it again. Only one person could walk through, and when he did, everything would change. For centuries, people thought it was just a story, a symbol, a metaphor. But then someone actually sealed the gate in 1541, and it stayed sealed ever since. Now, something is happening at that gate, something people are struggling to explain. The ancient prophecy isn't just history anymore. It might be activating. If you ever visit Jerusalem, you can see it with your own eyes. The Eastern Gate, some call it the Golden Gate, others call it the Gate of Mercy. It sits on the eastern wall of the Old City, facing the Mount of Olives, facing the rising sun. And it's completely sealed shut, not locked, not barricaded, sealed. Massive stones fill the archway where people once walked through. The entrance is gone, replaced by a wall of ancient rock that hasn't moved in nearly 500 years. But this isn't just any gate. Walk closer. Look at the structure. Two arched doorways sit by side. Beautiful stonework frames them. You can still see the craftsmanship. You can still imagine what it looked like when it was open, when pilgrims streamed through, when priests walked this path toward the temple. Now it's silent, frozen in time. And directly in front of it, a cemetery. Rows and rows of graves, thousands of them, Muslim graves, stretching across the slope between the gate and the Kidron Valley below. The graves weren't placed there by accident. Every tourist who visits this spot feels something strange, a weight, a tension, as if the air itself knows this place matters. Tour guides lower their voices here. Pilgrims stop and stare. Some pray, some weep, some just stand in silence, trying to understand what they're looking at. Because nothing about this gate makes sense. Not logically, not strategically, not unless you know the story behind it. Think about it. Gates exist to let people through. That's their entire purpose. You build a gate because you want access, you want movement, you want connection between one side and the other. So why seal one permanently? Jerusalem has 8 gates in its old city walls. 7 of them are open. People walk through them every single day. Tourists, locals, merchants, pilgrims. The city breathes through these gates. They're essential. But the eastern gate remains closed, the only sealed gate in the entire wall, the only entrance that leads nowhere. And no one has opened it since 1541, not for lack of trying. Here's where the mystery deepens. The eastern gate isn't just architecturally significant. It's positioned at the most important spot on the eastern wall, directly across from the Mount of Olives, directly aligned with where the ancient temple once stood. If you draw a straight line from the Mount of Olives across the Kidron Valley through the eastern gate, you hit the exact location of the temple's Holy of Holies, the most sacred spot in Jewish tradition, the place where God's presence was said to dwell. That alignment isn't coincidence. The gate was built there for a reason. Ancient priests used this gate for specific rituals. The red heifer ceremony, which we'll discuss later, involved this exact path. The scapegoat on Yom Kippur was sent out through this area. This gate connected the temple to the outside world in ways no other gate did. But here's what makes people nervous. Multiple religious traditions say this gate has a future, a specific purpose that hasn't happened yet, a role to play in events that believers say are still coming. Jewish tradition says the Messiah will enter Jerusalem through this eastern gate. It's written in their prophecies. It's embedded in their expectations. When the promised one comes, he will walk through this entrance. Christian tradition says Jesus will return through this same gate. Many scholars believe Jesus entered Jerusalem through this gate during his triumphal entry, and many believe he will return the same way.
Islamic tradition takes the gate seriously too, seriously enough to place a cemetery in front of it, seriously enough to ensure no one could easily pass through. 3 faiths, 1 gate, the same expectation. Some say this is just religious mythology, ancient stories that don't affect the modern world. But if that's true, why did an empire work so hard to seal it? Why did they place thousands of graves as a barrier? Why does this single gate remain closed when every other gate in the city stays open? The Ottoman Empire wasn't foolish. They didn't make decisions randomly. When Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent ordered this gate sealed in 1541, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the prophecies, all of them, and he believed them enough to take action. But there's something the Sultan didn't understand, something that would only become clear centuries later, something that suggests sealing the gate might have been part of the plan all along. The answer reaches back thousands of years, to a prophet who saw visions of Jerusalem's future, to words written long before the Ottoman Empire existed, long before the current gate was even built. Those words describe something specific, a gate, an eastern gate, and what would happen to it. But to understand why this gate terrifies empires, you need to know what happened here first. You need to understand what Ezekiel saw and why his vision still matters today. The story starts in ancient Babylon with a Jewish exile who saw things he couldn't explain. Things that are becoming clearer every day. Babylon, 593 BC. A Jewish priest named Ezekiel sits by the river Chebar. He's far from home, thousands of miles from Jerusalem, captured, exiled, watching his people suffer in a foreign land. But Ezekiel isn't an ordinary priest. He sees things, visions that don't make sense, images of creatures with 4 faces, wheels within wheels, fire and light, and sounds that human language can barely describe. And then he sees Jerusalem, not the Jerusalem of his time, something else, something future, something that wouldn't happen for thousands of years. Ezekiel sees the temple. He sees God's glory filling it. He sees the divine presence, the weight of holiness, dwelling in the sacred space. But then something terrible happens. The glory leaves. Ezekiel watches God's presence rise from the temple. He sees it move eastward, slowly, deliberately, passing through the courts, passing through the eastern gate, crossing the Kidron Valley, and finally resting on the Mount of Olives. The presence departs through the eastern gate, and Jerusalem is left empty. But that's not where Ezekiel's vision ends. He sees something else, something that wouldn't make sense for 2,500 years, something that still makes religious scholars pause when they read it. Ezekiel sees the glory return, coming from the east, crossing back over the Mount of Olives, passing through the same gate, filling the temple once more. And then God says something specific about that gate. The words are recorded in Ezekiel chapter 44, verses 1 through 4. You can read them yourself. The language is clear. This gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened. No man shall enter by it, because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered by it. Therefore it shall be shut.
The gate must stay sealed, not because humans decided to close it, because God passed through it. And no ordinary person can follow that path. Only one exception exists. The text mentions a prince, a ruler, someone who will sit in the gate and eat bread before the Lord, someone with the authority to use what everyone else must leave untouched. For centuries, these words seemed like poetry, symbolic language, prophetic imagery that didn't connect to physical reality. Then, something changed. Fast forward nearly 2,000 years. The year is 1541. The Ottoman Empire controls Jerusalem. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent is rebuilding the city walls, restoring fortifications, making Jerusalem a jewel of his empire. Suleiman was brilliant, a military genius, a patron of arts and architecture. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire reached its peak. He knew how to build, he knew how to defend, he knew how to rule, and he knew the prophecies. Suleiman wasn't ignorant of Jewish and Christian texts. He understood what they claimed about Jerusalem. He understood the expectations surrounding the Messiah. He understood that certain traditions pointed to the Eastern Gate as the entrance point for a coming king. So he made a decision. Seal it. Not just close it, not just lock it. Fill it completely with stone. Remove any possibility of passage. Make the gate into a wall. But Suleiman didn't stop there. The cemetery wasn't just a burial ground. It was a barrier. Here's what you need to understand. In Jewish law, a priest cannot become ritually impure. Touching a dead body or even walking over a grave creates impurity. A priest must remain clean to perform his duties. And according to Jewish tradition, the Messiah would come from the priestly line. Some interpretations suggest he would be a priest king, someone who couldn't defile himself by passing through a graveyard. Do you see what Suleiman did? First, he sealed it physically. Then, he sealed it spiritually. Thousands of Muslim graves placed directly in the path. Anyone approaching the gate would have to walk over the dead. Anyone from a priestly line would be disqualified. Checkmate, or so Suleiman thought. But here's what Suleiman didn't understand. By sealing the gate, he wasn't stopping the prophecy. He was fulfilling it. Ezekiel said the gate would be shut. No man would open it. The gate would remain sealed until the appointed time. Suleiman thought he was preventing something. Instead, he was participating in it. His fear of the prophecy became the mechanism of its completion. The irony is staggering. An Islamic sultan, trying to stop Jewish and Christian expectations, ended up doing exactly what a Jewish prophet predicted 2,000 years earlier. The gate Ezekiel said would be shut was shut by someone trying to make sure it stayed that way forever. But Suleiman wasn't the first ruler to take this gate seriously. History shows a pattern. Everyone who understood the prophecies responded to them. The Romans knew about Jewish messianic expectations. After destroying Jerusalem in 70 AD, they deliberately desecrated sacred sites. They built pagan temples over holy places. They tried to erase Jewish identity from the city entirely. The Crusaders knew the stories too. When they captured Jerusalem in 1099, they paid special attention to the Eastern Gate. Records suggest they briefly opened it, but it didn't stay open for long. The Byzantines, the Mamluks, the British, every empire that controlled Jerusalem had to decide what to do with this gate, and most of them treated it differently than the others. Why? Because everyone who ruled Jerusalem eventually learned the same thing. This gate isn't ordinary. The prophecies surrounding it aren't easily dismissed, and ignoring it completely felt dangerous. Even Napoleon, when his armies approached the region, reportedly showed unusual interest in Jerusalem's gates. Some historians suggest he knew the religious significance. Some suggest he feared it. The pattern repeats across centuries. Different empires, different religions, different motivations, but the same response. Take the gate seriously, because something about it demands respect. And here's what makes the whole thing even stranger. The gate we see today isn't the original gate. The structure tourists photograph, the sealed archways on the eastern wall, that gate was built around the 6th or 7th century AD, long before Ezekiel wrote his prophecy, long before the original temple gates crumbled. So which gate was Ezekiel talking about? The one that exists now, or something older, something buried, something hidden beneath the surface? For centuries, no one knew. The question remained theoretical, archaeological, academic. Then came 1969. A young American researcher named James Fleming was photographing the Eastern Gate. Rain had softened the ground. The earth beneath ancient sites is unpredictable. Centuries of construction, destruction, and rebuilding create unstable layers. Fleming stepped closer to get a better angle. Then, the ground disappeared. Not slowly, not with warning. One moment he was standing on solid ground. The next moment he was falling through darkness.
8 feet down into a space no one knew existed. His camera hit first. The crash echoed through the chamber. Fleming landed hard. His flashlight rolled across stone. For several seconds, he just lay there, catching his breath, making sure nothing was broken.
Then he pointed his flashlight at the wall in front of him, and everything changed. He was looking at another gate, not above him, not to the side, directly in front of him, an older gate, different stonework, different construction, sitting exactly where the sealed gate sat above. 2 gates, same location, different time periods. Fleming's archaeological training kicked in immediately. He examined the stones. The craftsmanship was distinct. The style suggested late Second Temple period, roughly the time of Jesus, maybe earlier. This wasn't a foundation. This wasn't rubble from a collapsed structure. This was an actual gate, complete archways, threshold stones still in place, spaces where massive doors once hung. A gate built roughly 2,000 years ago, a gate that had been buried and forgotten, a gate sitting directly beneath the one Suleiman sealed in 1541. But here's what made Fleming pause. The lower gate had been sealed too. Not recently, not by the Ottomans. The sealing was ancient, done at the same time the gate was buried, as if someone, long before Suleiman, had decided this passage needed to be closed permanently. Fleming spent hours in that chamber, taking photographs with whatever equipment still worked, sketching what he could see, documenting the discovery before anyone could tell him to stop. When he finally climbed out, he immediately contacted Israeli archaeologists. This was too important to keep quiet. This was a discovery that could rewrite our understanding of Jerusalem's history. But here's where the story takes a turn. The Israeli authorities examined Fleming's findings. They confirmed his dating. They verified the structure. They acknowledged this was indeed an older gate beneath the visible one. Then they sealed the chamber Fleming had fallen into, covered it back up, made it inaccessible again. Why? Politics, religion, the complexity of who controls what in Jerusalem. The Eastern Gate sits on one of the most sensitive pieces of real estate on earth. Any archaeological work there requires navigating between Israeli interests, Palestinian claims, and Islamic authority over the Temple Mount. Opening an ancient gate beneath the sealed gate, that raises too many questions. Questions about access, questions about prophecy, questions about who has the right to decide what happens at this site. So the lower gate remains hidden, still there, still sealed, still waiting beneath centuries of soil and stone. But Fleming's discovery confirms something critical. The gate we see today, the one tourists photograph, isn't the original Eastern Gate. It's a reconstruction, a later version built over something older, which means Ezekiel's prophecy might not be about the gate Suleiman sealed. It might be about the one beneath it, the one from the Second Temple period, the one Jesus would have known, the one that was already sealed long before the Ottomans arrived. Think about the timeline. Ezekiel wrote his prophecy around 593 BC, during the Babylonian exile. He described a gate that would be shut, a gate that only one person would have the authority to use. The Second Temple was built after the exile ended. The Eastern Gate would have been part of that construction. That gate stood during Jesus' time. Historical records suggest Jesus entered Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. The route would have taken him through the Eastern Gate. Then the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD. They destroyed the gates. They destroyed everything. The Eastern Gate was gone. Centuries later, Byzantine builders reconstructed the Eastern Wall. They built new gates roughly where the old ones had stood. But these weren't the original structures. The gate Fleming discovered was likely the actual Second Temple Gate, the gate from Jesus' era, the gate that stood when Ezekiel's prophecy was still fresh in people's minds. And that gate had been deliberately sealed and buried, not by Muslims, not by Ottomans, by someone much earlier, someone who knew the gate's significance, someone who wanted to preserve it exactly as Ezekiel said it should be, shut, sealed, waiting. Archaeological dating is complex. Fleming couldn't determine exactly when the lower gate was sealed, but the style of sealing suggested it happened not long after the temple's destruction, possibly during the Byzantine period, possibly earlier, which raises an uncomfortable question. Did early Christians, who believed Jesus would return through the Eastern Gate, seal it themselves? Did they read Ezekiel's prophecy and decide to preserve the gate exactly as described, shut until the appointed time? We don't know. The chamber Fleming discovered has been inaccessible for decades. No follow-up excavation has been permitted. The lower gate sits in darkness, sealed above and below, hidden from view.
But here's what we do know. 2 gates exist at this location. The upper gate, visible and sealed since 1541. The lower gate, hidden and sealed for possibly 2,000 years. Both sealed, both waiting, both positioned at the exact spot where prophecy says something significant will happen. The odds of that being a coincidence, nearly zero. Someone at multiple points in history took Ezekiel's words so seriously to ensure the eastern gate remained exactly as described. Shut, inaccessible, preserved. And if they took the sealing seriously, what else did they know? What else did they expect? Fleming had found the gate's past, a physical structure matching the timeline of prophecy, a gate that had been sealed longer than anyone realized. But something else was revealing its future, something happening right now, something that has people from multiple faiths watching this site more closely than ever before. Because while Fleming discovered what was hidden beneath the ground, others are reporting something different, something above ground, something that suggests the sealed gate might not stay sealed forever.
Let's talk about geography. Not symbolic geography, not metaphorical maps, actual, measurable, verifiable geography. Because the Eastern Gate sits at a location that makes it unlike any other gate in Jerusalem, and the alignment is so precise it's either the most remarkable coincidence in history or its intentional design that spans thousands of years. Stand on the Mount of Olives, face west, look toward Jerusalem. You're looking directly at the Eastern Gate. Now walk down the slope, cross the Kidron Valley. The path leads straight to the gate. No turns, no detours, a direct line from the mountain to the entrance. Pass through the gate, keep walking the same direction. You'll walk directly toward where the temple once stood. Not near it, not close to it. You'll walk right to the spot where the Holy of Holies was located, the most sacred space in Jewish tradition, the place where, according to Scripture, God's presence dwelled on earth. One straight line, Mount of Olives, Eastern Gate, Holy of Holies. That alignment isn't symbolic. You can measure it, you can map it, you can verify it with modern surveying equipment. And multiple prophecies reference this exact path. Ezekiel saw it first. In his vision, he watched God's glory leave the temple. The text describes the path precisely. The glory rose from the Holy of Holies, moved eastward, passed through the Eastern Gate, crossed to the Mount of Olives. Then Ezekiel saw the reverse, the glory returning, coming from the east, from the Mount of Olives, through the Eastern Gate, back to the temple. Same path, both directions, east to west, west to east. But Ezekiel wasn't the only prophet to describe this geography. Zechariah, another Jewish prophet, wrote about the Mount of Olives specifically. His words are recorded in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 4. His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley. His feet, someone's feet, standing on the Mount of Olives, facing Jerusalem, facing the temple. Zechariah was describing someone arriving from the east, someone whose arrival would be so significant the geography itself would change. The mountain would literally split, and the direction of the split? East to west, the same alignment as the gate, the same path Ezekiel described. The prophecies point to the same location, the same direction, the same entrance point. Now add the historical accounts. According to the Gospel accounts, Jesus entered Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, Palm Sunday, the crowd waving palm branches, people shouting Hosanna, the triumphal entry. The route Jesus took that day, from the Mount of Olives, down into the Kidron Valley, up toward the temple, through the Eastern Gate, the same path Ezekiel described, the same alignment Zechariah referenced. And many Christian scholars believe Jesus will return the same way, not just to Jerusalem, but to this specific gate, along this specific path. 3 different traditions, 3 different interpretations, but all pointing to the same location.
Jewish tradition expects the Messiah to enter through the eastern gate, the true king returning to claim his throne, walking the path of righteousness, entering the city as both priest and ruler. Christian tradition expects Jesus' second coming to mirror his first entry, coming from the Mount of Olives, entering through the eastern gate, fulfilling what Zechariah described about feet standing on the mountain. Islamic tradition takes the gate seriously too. Islamic eschatology speaks of end-times events centered in Jerusalem. While interpretations vary, the eastern side of the city features prominently in these expectations. That's why Suleiman placed the cemetery there, not randomly, not just for convenience. The graves were a deliberate theological statement, a barrier against expectations he knew existed across multiple faiths. But here's what makes the alignment even more intriguing. The eastern gate doesn't just align with the temple, it aligns with other significant locations too. Draw the line further back beyond the Mount of Olives. Where does it go? Bethany, the village where Lazarus lived, where Jesus stayed before entering Jerusalem, where the gospel accounts place him before the triumphal entry. Draw the line forward through the gate into the city, beyond the temple site. Where does it go? The traditional location of Golgotha, the place of the skull, where Christian tradition says Jesus was crucified. One line, Bethany, Mount of Olives, Eastern Gate, Holy of Holies. That alignment isn't symbolic. You can measure it, you can map it, you can verify it with modern surveying equipment, and multiple prophecies reference this exact path. Ezekiel saw it first. In his vision, he watched God's glory leave the temple. The text describes the path precisely. The glory rose from the Holy of Holies, moved eastward, passed through the eastern gate, crossed to the Mount of Olives. Then Ezekiel saw the reverse, the glory returning, coming from the east, from the Mount of Olives, through the eastern gate, back to the temple. Same path, both directions, east to west, west to east. But Ezekiel wasn't the only prophet to describe this geography. Zechariah, another Jewish prophet, wrote about the Mount of Olives specifically. His words are recorded in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 4. His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley. His feet, someone's feet, standing on the Mount of Olives, facing Jerusalem, facing the temple. Zechariah was describing someone arriving from the east, someone whose arrival would be so significant the geography itself would change, the mountain would literally split, and the direction of the split? East to west, the same alignment as the gate, the same path Ezekiel described. The prophecies point to the same location, the same direction, the same entrance point. Now add the historical accounts. According to the Gospel accounts, Jesus entered Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, Palm Sunday, the crowd waving palm branches, people shouting Hosanna, the triumphal entry. The route Jesus took that day, from the Mount of Olives, down into the Kidron Valley, up toward the temple, through the eastern gate. The same path Ezekiel described, the same alignment Zechariah referenced. And many Christian scholars believe Jesus will return the same way, not just to Jerusalem, but to this specific gate, along this specific path. 3 different traditions, 3 different interpretations, but all pointing to the same location. Jewish tradition expects the Messiah to enter through the eastern gate, the true king returning to claim his throne, walking the path of righteousness, entering the city as both priest and ruler. Christian tradition expects Jesus' second coming to mirror his first entry, coming from the Mount of Olives, entering through the eastern gate, fulfilling what Zechariah described about feet standing on the mountain. Islamic tradition takes the gate seriously too. Islamic eschatology speaks of end-times events centered in Jerusalem. While interpretations vary, the eastern side of the city features prominently in these expectations. That's why Suleiman placed the cemetery there, not randomly, not just for convenience. The graves were a deliberate theological statement, a barrier against expectations he knew existed across multiple faiths. But here's what makes the alignment even more intriguing. The Eastern Gate doesn't just align with the temple, it aligns with other significant locations too. Draw the line further back beyond the Mount of Olives. Where does it go? Bethany, the village where Lazarus lived, where Jesus stayed before entering Jerusalem, where the gospel accounts place him before the triumphal entry. Draw the line forward through the gate into the city, beyond the temple site. Where does it go? The traditional location of Golgotha, the place of the skull, where Christian tradition says Jesus was crucified. One line, Bethany, Mount of Olives, Eastern Gate, Holy of Holies. That alignment isn't symbolic. You can measure it, you can map it, you can verify it with modern surveying equipment. And multiple prophecies reference this exact path. Ezekiel saw it first. In his vision, he watched God's glory leave the temple. The text describes the path precisely. The glory rose from the Holy of Holies, moved eastward, passed through the Eastern Gate, crossed to the Mount of Olives. Then Ezekiel saw the reverse, the glory returning, coming from the east, from the Mount of Olives, through the Eastern Gate, back to the temple. Same path, both directions, east to west, west to east. But Ezekiel wasn't the only prophet to describe this geography. Zechariah, another Jewish prophet, wrote about the Mount of Olives specifically. His words are recorded in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 4. His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley. His feet, someone's feet, standing on the Mount of Olives, facing Jerusalem, facing the temple. Zechariah was described
Because while the prophecies are ancient, the response to them is accelerating. Right now, in real time. And what people are reporting at this gate is starting to sound less like history and more like something awakening. February 15, 2019. Something changed at the Eastern Gate. Not physically. The stones didn't move. The seal didn't break. Nothing visible happened that would show up in photographs. But access changed. And access to sacred sites in Jerusalem matters more than most people realize. On that day, Palestinian protesters forced their way into the gate's inner chambers, not through the sealed entrance itself, that remains blocked, but through side passages, through maintenance areas, through spaces that connect to the sealed structure from behind. Israeli security couldn't stop them without risking a major incident. The Temple Mount is under Jordanian custodial control through the Islamic Waqf. Israeli authorities can't simply storm in. The political consequences would be catastrophic. So the protesters stayed. They declared the area a Muslim prayer space. They've maintained access ever since. The gate that was sealed from the outside now has people inside it. And according to some reports, that's when the unusual accounts began. Tour guides who work in Jerusalem talk about it quietly. Not officially, not in front of large groups, but in private conversations, some admit they've noticed changes. Sarah Chen is one of them. She's been leading tours in Jerusalem for 15 years. She knows the old city better than most people know their own neighborhoods. She's walked past the Eastern Gate thousands of times. In an interview with a religious studies researcher, Chen described what she started noticing after 2019. Tourists react differently now, she said. They always found the gate interesting, but now they stand there longer. They ask different questions. Some of them start crying and they can't explain why. Chen reports similar experiences from other tour guides, people who've worked these routes for decades, all noticing the same shift, more emotion, more intensity, more people feeling something they can't articulate. Some dismiss these accounts. Tourist reactions are subjective. People project their expectations onto sacred sites. If you believe something is holy, you'll feel something when you encounter it. But the reports share certain details. Details that witnesses claim they didn't coordinate. Visitors describe feeling warmth near the sealed stones. Not from sunlight. The effect is reported even in shadow, even during winter. A subtle heat that seems to come from within the wall itself. Others report sounds. Not voices exactly, more like resonance. A low frequency that you feel in your chest rather than hear with your ears. Some describe it as humming. Others say it's more like breathing. The difficulty of verifying such claims is obvious. How do you measure subjective warmth? How do you record feelings? How do you prove that what people experience is real versus imagined? You can't. Not scientifically, not objectively, which is exactly why skeptics dismiss these reports entirely, and why believers take them as confirmation of what they already expect. But here's what's undeniable. The volume of reports has increased. Social media amplifies everything now. Someone posts about an experience at the Eastern Gate, others respond with their own similar experiences. Patterns emerge that might not have been visible before the internet connected everyone. A Facebook group dedicated to Jerusalem pilgrimage experiences has over 40,000 members. Search that group for posts about the Eastern Gate. You'll find hundreds of accounts, people from different countries, different denominations, different backgrounds. Many describe the same sensations, the warmth, the resonance, the emotional weight. Are they influencing each other, reading previous posts and unconsciously recreating the experience? Possibly, probably even. But some accounts come from people who claim they experienced something before reading about it, before knowing others felt the same way. In 2021, a Brazilian pastor named Carlos Mendes visited Jerusalem. He posted a video describing his experience at the Eastern Gate. He claimed he felt a pulse when he placed his hand on the sealed stones, like a heartbeat, but not my own heartbeat, something else. The video went viral in evangelical circles, over 2 million views, thousands of comments from people claiming identical experiences. Critics pointed out the obvious. Mendes knew the prophecies. He expected to feel something. His brain manufactured the sensation to match his beliefs. But then others reported similar experiences. People who hadn't seen Mendes's video. People who weren't even Christian. Jewish visitors, Muslim visitors, even secular tourists who had no religious expectations at all. In 2021, an atheist blogger from Sweden named Eric Lindstrom visited Jerusalem as part of a tour of Mediterranean historical sites. He wrote about his experience at the Eastern Gate. "I don't believe in any of this," his blog post began, "but I'm trying to be honest about what I experienced." Lindstrom described standing near the gate for several minutes. He reports feeling something like pressure in the air. Not uncomfortable, just present, like standing near a large speaker but without sound. He tried to rationalize it. Wind patterns, acoustic effects from the valley, heat rising from the stones. None of his explanations satisfied him. "I'm not saying it's supernatural. I'm saying I experienced something I can't explain, and that bothers me." Reports like these are harder to dismiss. They come from people who gain nothing from fabricating experiences, people who have no religious agenda, people who are almost embarrassed to admit what they felt. But here's where the story gets more complicated. Not everyone reports positive experiences. Some visitors describe unease, anxiety, a sense of dread they can't shake. They approach the gate and feel an overwhelming urge to leave. A Catholic nun from Poland, Sister Maria Kowalski, described her experience in a letter to her diocese. She had traveled to Jerusalem specifically to pray at holy sites. She was excited to see the Eastern Gate, but when she approached, she felt afraid. Not of danger, not of anything physical. She felt I was intruding, that I wasn't supposed to be there, that the gate was waiting for someone and I was not that person. Sister Maria left without praying. She said she couldn't bring herself to get closer. Others report similar reactions, a sense of being unwelcome, not by people, by the place itself, as if the gate projects a message, not yet, not you. These accounts are harder to explain with religious expectation. Why would believers travel to a holy site expecting a profound spiritual experience only to feel rejection? Unless something about the site really does affect people, something beyond psychology, something that responds differently to different people. The scientific community remains skeptical, obviously. Dr. Michael Harrington, a psychologist specializing in religious experiences, has studied Jerusalem syndrome, the documented phenomenon where visitors to Jerusalem suddenly believe they're biblical prophets. Jerusalem syndrome is real. It's recognized in psychiatric literature. Dozens of cases every year. People with no prior mental health issues suddenly experiencing delusions centered on religious identity. Dr. Harrington suggests the Eastern Gate experiences fall into a similar category. Jerusalem is a city saturated with religious meaning, he explained. People come here with expectations. Their brains fill in the rest. But Dr. Harrington also admits something interesting. The Eastern Gate accounts are different, he says. Jerusalem syndrome involves delusion, false beliefs. These reports don't claim divine messages or prophetic visions. They claim sensory experiences, warmth, pressure, emotional reactions. That's harder to categorize as delusion, he continues, because we can't prove they're not feeling what they claim to feel. The debate continues. Believers point to the accounts as evidence something is happening. Skeptics point to the same accounts as evidence of mass suggestion. But both sides agree on one fact. More people are paying attention to this gate than at any point in history. Pilgrimages to Jerusalem have increased. Tourism numbers show steady growth, but visits to the Eastern Gate specifically have grown even faster. The gate has become a destination within a destination, not just a stop on a tour, a place where people deliberately spend time, waiting, watching, hoping to experience what others have described. Some come with measuring equipment, thermometers to check for unusual heat, audio recorders to capture strange sounds, EMF detectors to measure electromagnetic fields. The results? Inconclusive at best. Some claim their devices registered anomalies, others found nothing unusual. The data depends entirely on who's collecting it and what they expect to find. What's undeniable is the attention itself. A gate that remained relatively obscure for centuries is now discussed in churches, synagogues, and mosques worldwide. YouTube videos about the Eastern Gate rack up millions of views. Books analyzing its prophetic significance hit bestseller lists. Whether you believe the reports or not, something undeniable is happening. More people are watching this gate than at any point in history. The prophecies haven't changed. They've been written for 2,500 years, but human awareness of them has exploded. And according to some researchers, this mass attention might be creating something real. Not supernatural necessarily, but psychological, social, a collective expectation that gains momentum through sheer numbers of people believing the same thing. When millions expect something to happen at a specific location, does that expectation create its own reality? That's not a religious question, that's a sociological one, and the answer might matter more than anyone realizes. Because while people debate whether the experiences are real, the response to them is undeniably real, and it's accelerating. Jerusalem sits on a fault line.
Not metaphorically, literally. A geological fault line runs directly beneath the city, part of the Dead Sea Transform, a major tectonic boundary stretching from the Red Sea to Turkey. This isn't speculation, it's documented geology. The fault has been mapped, studied, measured by seismologists for decades, and it's active. Small earthquakes happen regularly in the region. Most are too minor to feel, magnitude 3.0 or less, but larger quakes occur periodically. Historical records document major earthquakes damaging Jerusalem in 31 BC, 363 AD, 749 AD, and 1927 AD. The geological reality matters because it provides context for what some researchers claim to have detected. Dr. Yossi Ben David works at the Geophysical Institute of Israel. His job involves monitoring seismic activity throughout the region, earthquake prediction, structural safety assessments, standard geological work. In a 2020 interview with an Israeli science publication, Dr. Ben David mentioned something unusual about readings near the Temple Mount. "We have seismographs positioned throughout Jerusalem," he explained. "Most show consistent patterns, background tremors, minor fluctuations, normal seismic behavior for a fault zone. But the sensors near the eastern wall sometimes show anomalies, small vibrations that don't match the patterns elsewhere. Not earthquakes, something else." When pressed for details, Dr. Ben David was careful. "I'm not claiming anything supernatural. I'm saying we detect vibrations that don't fit standard models. They could be related to underground water flow, or structural settling, or tourist foot traffic. We don't know." But here's what makes his comments interesting. The anomalies he describes happen most frequently near the Eastern Gate, and they don't correlate with activity elsewhere in the city. Standard seismic activity shows up on multiple sensors simultaneously. An earthquake registers across the network. Even minor tremors create patterns you can trace, but the vibrations Dr. Ben David references appear on sensors near the gate without appearing elsewhere, as if the source is extremely localized, extremely specific. "It's probably nothing," Dr. Ben David concluded, "but it's worth noting. Other researchers have noted geological peculiarities in the area too. The Mount of Olives, directly across from the Eastern Gate, shows visible geological stress. Cracks have appeared in the rock. Not new cracks, these have been documented for years, but some geologists report they're widening. Dr. Rachel Steinberg, a geological surveyor with Hebrew University, has measured the main crack annually since 2015. It's definitely expanding, she confirmed in a 2022 research paper. Roughly 2 millimeters per year. Consistent growth. 2 millimeters might not sound like much, but in geological terms, that's significant, especially for rock that's been stable for thousands of years. What's causing it? Dr. Steinberg suggests several possibilities. The Mount of Olives is riddled with ancient burial chambers, thousands of tombs carved into the rock over millennia. That creates structural weakness. Add modern construction on top. Add water infiltration during rainy seasons. The mountain is literally being hollowed out. All reasonable explanations, all based on solid geological science. But then Dr. Steinberg adds something else. The interesting part is the direction. The crack runs almost perfectly east to west, directly toward the Temple Mount, directly toward the eastern gate. That alignment again. The same alignment the prophecies describe. The same alignment Zechariah mentioned when he wrote about the Mount of Olives splitting. Coincidence? Almost certainly. Mountains don't split because of prophecy. They split because of geological stress. The direction of the crack likely follows existing weaknesses in the rock structure. Nothing supernatural about it, but the alignment makes people nervous anyway, because if the crack continues expanding at the current rate, if the structural integrity continues degrading, the Mount of Olives could experience a significant geological event within decades. Not a supernatural splitting, a natural landslide, or collapse, or fracture. Events that happen on mountains worldwide when structural stress exceeds the rock's capacity to hold together. But it would happen along an east-west line, pointing toward the gate. Beneath the Temple Mount itself, the geological situation is even more complex. No one can excavate there. The site is too politically sensitive. The Islamic Waqf forbids archaeological work beneath the dome of the rock. Israeli authorities won't risk the international incident, so what's actually under there remains mostly unknown. But ground-penetrating radar has revealed some information, and what it shows is complicated. Massive underground chambers exist beneath the Temple Mount. Some are documented. The Marwani Mosque, formerly Solomon's Stables, occupies a huge underground space on the southeastern corner. Tourists can visit it. But other chambers appear on radar scans that have never been excavated, never been explored, never been documented in historical records. Dr. Jonathan Price, an archaeologist who studied Temple Mount surveys, describes what the technology reveals. We can see voids, empty spaces where there should be solid rock. Some of them are huge, cathedral-sized chambers sitting beneath one of the most important religious sites in the world, and we have no idea what they are. Some might be natural caverns. Jerusalem's limestone bedrock erodes over time. Water creates caves. Nothing unusual about that. But the positioning of some chambers is too regular, too deliberate, too architectural. They look artificial, Dr. Price admits, like someone built them. But we can't confirm without excavation, and excavation isn't happening. The chambers run in various directions, but several align along the same east-west axis we keep encountering, from the eastern wall, beneath the Temple Mount, toward the western side. The same path the prophecies describe, the same route God's glory supposedly took when he left the temple. Again, this could all be coincidence. Ancient builders often align structures with cardinal directions. East-west alignments are common in sacred architecture worldwide, but the pattern keeps appearing in prophecy, in geography, in archaeology, in geology, as if everything about this location points in the same direction. Underground water systems add another layer of mystery. Ancient Jerusalem depended on water sources outside the city walls. The Gihon Spring, the Pool of Siloam, complex tunnel systems brought water into the city. Some of these tunnels run near the eastern gate. Some might run beneath it. But the complete network has never been fully mapped. In 2004, workers doing routine maintenance in the Kidron Valley discovered a previously unknown tunnel. It ran beneath the eastern wall, roughly in the direction of the Temple Mount. Israeli archaeologists examined it briefly. They dated it to the Second Temple period, same era as the lower gate Fleming discovered. Then they sealed it again. Too politically sensitive, too close to contested areas. But the tunnel's discovery confirmed something. The eastern gate area has underground structures that we don't fully understand, passages that might connect to larger systems, spaces that might hold secrets we haven't uncovered. What's down there? We don't know. We can't know, not without excavation that's currently impossible. But ground-penetrating radar,
seismic sensors, and archaeological surveys all suggest the same thing. The area around the Eastern Gate is more complex than what we see on the surface. There are layers, literally and figuratively, physical layers of construction from different eras, historical layers of different empires building over previous structures, geological layers of rock, soil, and time compressed together. And somewhere in those layers, questions remain unanswered. Why did someone build the lower gate in that specific location? Why seal it so thoroughly? What's in the chambers beneath the Temple Mount? Why do the seismic sensors show anomalies that don't appear elsewhere?
Science can measure what's there. Technology can detect patterns. Geology can explain natural processes. But science can't explain why so many systems seem to be pointing to the same place. The fault line runs beneath Jerusalem. That's geology. The Mount of Olives is cracking along an east-west line. That's structural stress. Underground chambers exist beneath the Temple Mount. That's archaeology. All explainable individually, all reasonable when examined separately. But taken together, the pattern starts to feel less random. Not supernatural necessarily, just improbable. A convergence of geological, archaeological, and geographical factors all centering on one gate. One sealed gate. One prophecy. One alignment that keeps appearing in multiple contexts. Science says it's coincidence, data points that happen to overlap, natural phenomena that don't actually connect, but the data keeps pointing. The measurements keep aligning. The discoveries keep revealing the same eastward orientation. And researchers, even skeptical ones, are starting to notice. Something shifted in global attention around 2015. Jerusalem has always drawn pilgrims. 3 major religions consider it sacred. Tourism has been steady for decades. Nothing unusual about people visiting the old city. But the nature of that attention changed. Statistics from the Israeli Ministry of Tourism show the shift clearly. From 2015 to 2019, overall tourism to Israel increased by 37%. Normal growth for a developing tourism market. But visits specifically to the Eastern Gate increased by 118%. People weren't just visiting Jerusalem, they were seeking out this specific location, asking tour guides to take them there, spending extended time at the site, returning multiple times during the same trip. Why? Part of the answer involves technology. Social media made information about prophecy accessible to millions who previously had no exposure to these ideas. YouTube videos explaining biblical prophecy rack up tens of millions of views. The algorithm recommends related content. People fall down rabbit holes of prophetic interpretation. The Eastern Gate features prominently in these discussions. Christian evangelicals who believe in the imminent return of Jesus see the sealed gate as a sign, a physical marker of prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. But it's not just Christians paying attention. Jewish groups focused on rebuilding the temple have increased their activities. Organizations like the Temple Institute in Jerusalem have spent years preparing ritual objects for future temple service. They've trained priests, woven priestly garments, created vessels according to biblical specifications. These aren't fringe groups. The Temple Institute operates openly. They offer public tours. They publish educational materials. Their work is documented and legal. And in recent years, their focus has intensified. In 2018, the Temple Institute announced they had identified a red heifer, a completely red cow without blemish. According to Numbers chapter 19, such an animal is required for a specific purification ritual, a ritual necessary before temple service can begin. Why does this matter? Jewish tradition holds that the ashes of a red heifer are needed to purify priests and sacred objects. Without this purification, temple service cannot begin, and without temple service, many believe the prophetic timeline cannot advance. Red heifers are extremely rare. Jewish sources claim only 9 have existed in all of history. The last one was used before the Second Temple's destruction in 70 AD. For nearly 2,000 years, no red heifer has been available, which meant temple service remained impossible even if political circumstances allowed it. Then, Texas ranchers, working with Israeli religious authorities, began breeding cattle specifically to produce a red heifer. After years of attempts, they succeeded. In September 2022,
5 red heifers arrived in Israel, flown from Texas to Tel Aviv, transported to a secure location, examined by rabbinical authorities to confirm they meet biblical requirements. This isn't conspiracy theory. This happened. It was reported in mainstream Israeli media. The cows exist. They're being prepared for a specific purpose. But here's what makes this significant for the Eastern Gate. The red heifer ritual, according to tradition, involves specific geography. The heifer is burned on the Mount of Olives. The ashes are prepared there. The priest performing the ritual must have a clear view of where the temple stood. That line of sight runs through the Eastern Gate. The same alignment, the same eastward path, Mount of Olives to Eastern Gate to Temple. Jewish groups preparing for temple service are explicitly planning around this geography. They're not just hoping for prophetic fulfillment, they're actively preparing for it, with real resources, real animals, real training. This preparation creates tension. Muslim authorities controlling the Temple Mount see these activities as a direct threat. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque occupy the Temple Mount. Any Jewish attempt to build a temple there would require removing Islamic structures. The political ramifications would be catastrophic. Regional war, international crisis, unimaginable conflict. Yet the preparations continue. Israeli security services monitor the situation carefully. They're not worried about supernatural prophecy. They're worried about human beings taking action based on belief in that prophecy. Because when enough people believe something will happen, they start making it happen. Whether the original prophecy was supernatural or not becomes irrelevant. The belief itself creates momentum, and that momentum is building across multiple groups simultaneously. In 2004, a group of rabbis reconstituted the Sanhedrin, the ancient Jewish religious court that hadn't met in nearly 2,000 years. The Sanhedrin historically made decisions about temple service, religious law, and national leadership. The reconvened Sanhedrin has no official governmental power, but they claim religious authority, and they've made public declarations about preparing for the Messiah's arrival. Again, this isn't hidden activity. They publish these statements. They hold public meetings. They operate in the open. Meanwhile, Christian evangelical groups have increased their financial support for Israeli organizations preparing for the temple. Millions of dollars flowing from American churches to Israeli groups, all based on shared belief that these preparations will hasten prophetic fulfillment. The convergence isn't just theological, it's financial, organizational, international. Different groups, different motivations, different interpretations, but all focused on the same square mile in Jerusalem. All watching the same gates, all preparing for the same general expectation. Something is coming. Someone is returning. The current situation is temporary. Islamic groups watch these preparations with alarm. From their perspective, this is a coordinated attempt to destroy the third holiest site in Islam. The Dome of the Rock has stood for over 1,300 years. Al-Aqsa Mosque is central to Islamic history. Any threat to these sites mobilizes millions of Muslims worldwide. So you have 3 groups, all watching the same location, all with incompatible expectations, all believing their understanding is correct, all preparing for what they think comes next. That's not prophecy, that's geopolitics. Human conflict driven by religious belief. But the conflict itself might be part of the pattern. Because multiple prophetic traditions don't just predict a peaceful arrival. They predict conflict, tension, wars and rumors of wars, nations gathering against Jerusalem. If those prophecies are being fulfilled, this tension might be exactly what's supposed to happen, not despite human free will, but through it. People choosing actions based on beliefs, creating the very conditions the prophecies described.
The question becomes circular. Are people fulfilling prophecy, or are they creating what they've been told to expect? No clear answer exists, but the preparations are undeniably real. The red heifers exist, the Sanhedrin meets, money flows, training happens, plans develop, all pointing toward the same goal: resuming temple service, welcoming the Messiah, opening the sealed gate. For 2,000 years, these ideas remained theoretical. Religious hope without practical possibility. Now they're becoming practical. Resources exist. Organizations are active.
Technology enables coordination that was impossible in previous generations. And the focal point of all this preparation? The Eastern Gate. The gate that must stay shut until the right person comes. The gate that three faiths believe holds significance. The gate that sits on perfect geographical alignment with the Mount of Olives and the temple site. Whether prophecy is real or not, the response to it is undeniably real, and it's accelerating. More money, more attention, more preparation, more groups coordinating, more people believing that something is about to happen. The prophecies themselves haven't changed. They've been written for millennia, but human capacity to act on them has exploded. For the first time in history, everyone can watch, everyone can participate, everyone can prepare. Social media spreads ideas instantly. Fundraising happens online. Coordination crosses borders effortlessly. What would have taken decades in previous eras now happens in months. The timeline feels compressed, accelerated, as if the gap between expectation and fulfillment is closing. Not because of supernatural intervention necessarily, because of human action, human belief, human preparation, and all of it converging on one sealed gate, one ancient prophecy, one location that refuses to release its grip on human imagination. The gate has been sealed for 500 years, but the attention on it has never been higher. The preparations surrounding it have never been more organized. The expectations attached to it have never been more intense. And that raises one final question, the question that makes this more than just history or archaeology or religious studies. What happens when millions of people expect something to occur at a specific location, when they prepare for it, when they invest in it, when they organize around it? Does their expectation create its own reality? Does mass belief generate momentum that takes on a life of its own? That's not a religious question anymore. That's a psychological one, a sociological one, a question about human nature and collective consciousness, and the answer might be revealing itself right now, in real time. Every generation has believed they were the last. Early Christians expected Jesus to return within their lifetimes. Paul's letters suggest he thought he'd witness the second coming. He wrote about "we who are still alive," as if the event was imminent. It didn't happen. Medieval Christians saw the Black Death and thought the end was near. A third of Europe dead, society collapsing. Surely this was the apocalypse. It wasn't. In 1844, a Christian movement called the Millerites predicted Jesus would return on October 22nd. Thousands of believers sold their possessions, gathered on hilltops, waited for the sky to open. Nothing happened. The event became known as the Great Disappointment. The pattern repeats across history. Different groups, different calculations, different prophetic interpretations, all convinced their generation was special, all proven wrong by the simple fact that time kept moving forward. So why should now be any different? That's the skeptic's strongest argument. Every generation thinks they're living in the end times. Every generation points to their current events as fulfillment of prophecy. Every generation is wrong. Why would ours be the exception? Here's what's different. For the first time in history, everyone can watch everything simultaneously. When early Christians expected the second coming, most people in the world didn't know Christianity existed. Information traveled at walking speed. Someone in Jerusalem might not hear about events in Rome for months. When medieval Europeans saw the Black Death as apocalyptic, people in China, Africa, and the Americas had no knowledge of it. The plague was catastrophic for Europe, but it was regional, not global. When the Millerites made their prediction, most of the world's population couldn't read, had no access to their pamphlets, had never heard of their calculation. But now, right now, someone in Tokyo can watch a live stream from Jerusalem. Someone in Brazil can read prophecy interpretations from an Israeli rabbi in real time. Someone in rural Africa with a smartphone can access the same information as a seminary professor in America. The entire planet is connected. Information is instant. Everyone can watch everything. That changes the equation fundamentally. It's not that the prophecies are different. It's that human awareness of them has exploded. What was once known by small groups is now discussed by millions. What was once regional is now global. And that creates something that's never existed before: simultaneous collective expectation at a planetary scale. Social media algorithms accelerate the spread. YouTube suggests prophecy content to people who've never sought it. TikTok videos about the Eastern Gate reach viewers across every demographic. Facebook groups dedicated to end times theology have millions of members. The platform companies don't care about prophecy. They care about engagement. And prophecy content generates massive engagement. Fear, hope, curiosity, these emotions drive clicks, drive shares, drive comments. So the algorithms promote it, not because of conspiracy, because of commerce. Prophecy content performs well, so it gets amplified. And millions of people who would never have encountered these ideas in previous generations are suddenly immersed in them. That creates a feedback loop. More people watching leads to more content created. More content leads to more people watching. The cycle accelerates. Expectations build. A sense that something is happening intensifies, even if nothing is actually happening. Dr. Amanda Chen studies collective behavior at Stanford University. Her research focuses on how mass expectations shape reality. Belief is a powerful force, she explains. When enough people believe something will happen, they start behaving as if it will happen. Those behaviors create real effects, real consequences. Dr. Chen studied the 2012 Mayan calendar phenomenon. Millions believed the world would end on December 21, 2012. It didn't, obviously, but the belief affected real behavior. People quit jobs, sold possessions, changed life plans. The prophecy was false, Dr. Chen notes, but the response was real. Decisions were made, money was spent, lives were altered, all based on a belief that proved incorrect. Now multiply that by 100 million people, all believing something about Jerusalem, all watching the same gate, all expecting the same general outcome. You don't need supernatural intervention for that to create real effects. Mass belief generates its own momentum, and that momentum is measurable. Google Trends shows search interest in Eastern Gate Jerusalem has increased 340% since 2015. Searches for Temple Mount prophecy up 280%. Searches for Red Heifer Israel spiked dramatically after the 2022 arrival. Now combine that with the physical preparations happening in Jerusalem. The Red Heifers exist, the Temple Institute active, the fundraising for rebuilding the temple continuing. It's the perfect storm of online expectation meeting physical preparation, all converging on one sealed gate, one ancient prophecy, one location that refuses to release its grip on human imagination. And that is the state of play right now. Next, we'll explore the specific challenges, failures, and interactions between the different groups involved on the ground. How attempts to bring the temple into being have created tensions and unexpected conflicts. The complexities that come when theoretical expectations meet the practical reality of Jerusalem today.
These aren't just curious clicks. They represent real people investing real time into understanding these topics. Reading, watching videos, joining groups, planning trips to Jerusalem. Book sales tell the same story. Prophecy-focused books regularly hit bestseller lists. The End Times by Jonathan Cahn sold over 1 million copies. The Last Days series by Tim LaHaye sold over 80 million copies worldwide. Those aren't small numbers. Those represent massive cultural engagement with apocalyptic expectation. And here's the critical part. This engagement is happening across religious boundaries. It's not just evangelical Christians anymore. Observant Jews watch prophecy content. Muslims discuss end times theology. Even secular people curious about religion encounter these ideas. The expectation has escaped its traditional containers. It's become part of broader culture, part of how millions of people understand current events. Every Middle East conflict gets interpreted through a prophetic lens. Every earthquake in the region generates prophecy speculation. Every political development in Israel prompts questions about the temple. The lens through which people view events has shifted, and that shift affects how they respond to those events. Politicians in Israel know this. They understand that millions of evangelical Christians support Israel partly because of prophetic belief. Those Christians vote, they donate, they influence American foreign policy. So Israeli leaders acknowledge this support. They make symbolic gestures. They allow red heifers to be imported. They permit groups to train priests and prepare vessels. Not necessarily because they believe the prophecies themselves, but because they recognize the political power of people who do believe them. That's the feedback loop in action. Belief shapes behavior. Behavior creates political reality. Political reality enables further preparation. Preparation reinforces belief. Round and round, faster and faster. Technology accelerates everything else too. Archaeological discoveries that once took years to announce are now tweeted instantly. Seismic readings that would sit in academic journals for months get posted online immediately. Tourist experiences at the Eastern Gate are shared before people leave Jerusalem. The speed of information has compressed time, not actual time, perceived time. The feeling that events are moving faster, that the gap between then and now is shrinking, and that feeling affects behavior, creates urgency, pushes people to act rather than wait. Groups preparing for the temple don't have decades anymore. They have now, right now, this moment, before circumstances change, before opportunity passes. So they accelerate their efforts, which creates more content, which generates more attention, which brings more people into the conversation, which increases urgency further. The cycle feeds itself. Is this prophecy fulfilling itself, or is this mass psychology creating what it expects to see? The honest answer? Both might be true simultaneously. If prophecy is real, it might work through human psychology, through mass expectation, through the very feedback loops we can measure and observe. And if prophecy isn't real, human belief in it might still create outcomes that look identical to fulfillment. Either way, the effect is the same. Momentum building, attention focusing, resources flowing, preparations advancing, all centered on Jerusalem, all watching the same sights, all expecting something to break through. The gate has been sealed for 500 years, but the pressure on it has never been greater. Not physical pressure, psychological pressure, cultural pressure, the weight of millions of people staring at it, waiting for it, believing it will open. Does that belief matter? Does human expectation affect physical reality? Maybe not. Probably not. But it definitely affects human reality. The decisions people make, the resources they allocate, the actions they take. And when millions take action based on the same belief, those actions create undeniable effects. The gate might not be opening, but the world's attention on it is widening, intensifying, reaching critical mass. And that raises one final question, the question that makes this story about you, not just about history or prophecy or distant events. What are you going to do with this information? So here we are. You've spent the last hour learning about a sealed gate in Jerusalem, ancient prophecies, archaeological discoveries, geological anomalies, mass preparations by multiple religious groups, millions of people watching, waiting, expecting. And now the question shifts from out there to in here, from Jerusalem to wherever you are right now. Because this story isn't ultimately about stones and prophecies. It's about human beings confronting the possibility that something beyond ordinary reality might be real. Let's be honest about what we've covered. The verifiable facts are limited. The Eastern Gate is sealed. Suleiman did close it in 1541. Fleming did discover an older gate beneath it. The geographical alignment with the Mount of Olives and temple site is measurable. Multiple religious groups are preparing for prophetic events. Tourist attention has increased dramatically. Those facts are documented, checkable, real. Everything else? Interpretation. The warmth people report feeling at the gate. Could be psychological projection. Could be actual thermal variation from sun exposure. Could be nothing. The seismic anomalies Dr. Ben David mentioned. Could be measurement error. Could be underground water. Could be tourist foot traffic creating vibrations. Could be exactly what he said. Something unexplained, but probably natural. The red heifers, the Sanhedrin, and the preparations, all real, all documented. But preparing for prophecy doesn't mean the prophecy is true. It means people believe it strongly enough to act. So where does that leave you? 3 possibilities exist. First possibility, all of this is coincidence and mass psychology. The gate is just a gate. The prophecies are ancient literature. The patterns people see are the human brain doing what it does best, finding meaning where none exists. Under this interpretation, nothing supernatural is happening. Nothing ever will. The gate will stay sealed until erosion or politics or time eventually opens it. And when it does, nothing prophetic will occur. Just stones moving, nothing more. If this interpretation is correct, then all the attention, all the preparations, all the expectation is wasted energy. Millions investing in a story that isn't true. Second possibility, the prophecies are real, but the timing is unknowable. Something will happen at this gate, someday, but not necessarily in our lifetime. Maybe centuries from now, maybe millennia. Under this interpretation, the prophecies themselves are valid, but current excitement is premature. People have been wrong about timing for 2,000 years. We are probably wrong too. If this interpretation is correct, then watching and preparing isn't wasted. It's just early. The gate will matter eventually, but rushing toward that moment doesn't accelerate it. Third possibility, the prophecies are real and the timing is now. Everything converging on Jerusalem is exactly what should be happening. The increased attention, the preparations, the sense of acceleration, all signs that the waiting is almost over. If this interpretation is correct, then how you respond matters eternally. Which interpretation is true? No one can prove it from the outside. You can't logic your way to certainty. You can't wait for enough evidence to remove all doubt.
At some point, this becomes a choice, not based on complete information, based on whatever information you have filtered through your worldview, your experiences, your capacity to believe. Some people read this story and immediately dismiss it. Coincidence, psychology, nothing more. Others read it and feel something stirring. Not certainty, not proof, just a sense that maybe, possibly, this matters more than they realized. And a small number read it and know, with a certainty they can't explain and don't need to defend. They know something is happening. They know it matters. They know they need to respond. Which are you? Here's what's not being asked of you. You're not being asked to sell everything and move to Jerusalem. You're not being asked to join a movement or adopt a theological system or predict dates. You're being asked something simpler and harder. Are you willing to consider the possibility that reality is bigger than what you can measure, that there might be purpose behind history, that the ancient words written by prophets might actually mean something, not demanding you believe it, asking if you're willing to consider it? Because here's the thing about the Eastern Gate that makes it different from other religious sites. It's waiting for someone, not something, someone. The prophecies don't say the gate will open because of earthquakes or erosion or political decisions. They say it will open when a specific person arrives, someone with the authority to pass through what everyone else must leave sealed. And if that's true, if someone is coming, then the only question that matters is this: when he arrives, will you recognize him? Will you be watching? Will you be ready? Will you have spent your life preparing for that moment or ignoring the possibility it could happen? Jewish tradition says the Messiah could come any day. There's even a blessing that includes watching for his arrival, every generation maintaining the expectation, never letting it die. Christian tradition says Jesus will return unexpectedly, like a thief in the night, at an hour no one anticipates, catching people off guard. Both traditions emphasize readiness, not prediction, readiness. The gate has been sealed for 500 years. It could stay sealed for 500 more. Or it could open tomorrow. You don't control that. You don't determine the timing. You can only control how you live in light of the possibility.
Do you live as if only the physical world exists, as if death is the end, as if nothing beyond matter and energy has any reality? Or do you live as if there might be more, as if the ancient stories might be pointing towards something true, as if your choices might echo beyond your lifespan? This isn't about religion, not really. It's about how you understand reality itself. Is the universe meaningless particles bouncing around randomly? Or is there purpose woven into existence? Is there a plan? Is there someone behind it? The Eastern Gate can't answer that for you. Neither can prophecy, neither can archaeological evidence or tourist experiences or seismic readings. At some point, you have to decide what you believe, not based on proof, based on faith, or the absence of it. And here's the uncomfortable part. Choosing not to decide is still a decision. Saying, "I'll wait for more evidence," is choosing to live as if the prophecies aren't true. Because living as if they might be true requires something from you now: attention, preparation, readiness, not obsession, not abandoning normal life, just maintaining awareness that maybe, possibly, something bigger is happening than what CNN reports. So what are you going to do? Keep scrolling? Forget this story? Go back to normal life? Dismiss it as interesting but irrelevant? Or let it change something, even something small? Let it crack open your certainty that physical reality is all that exists. The gate is sealed. That's a fact. The prophecies exist. That's a fact. People are watching. That's a fact. Whether any of it matters, that's not a fact. That's a question each person has to answer for themselves. You've heard the story now. You know the gate exists. You know what people expect. The gate remains sealed, for now. But something you should probably know before you click away. The last time anyone checked, 3 days ago. The crack Dr. Ben David mentioned? The one that didn't match patterns elsewhere? It's growing.